Your children aren't safe from the transgender menace. The schools transition my son secretly. It's very clear the courts will side with the parent that wants to transition a child, not the other way around. The most important thing is that in your state, in your schools, and in your county, you make sure that this stuff is illegal. You make sure that it is not legal for the government to assist it, and make sure it's not legal for parents to do it to their children.
You must be some kind of therapist.
Today, I am speaking with Jeff Younger. He is a father of a son who was quote-unquote transitioned and chemically castrated without his consent. Jeff now works as a family rights activist, and today he is here to share a harrowing cautionary tale. Should be a sobering conversation, but a necessary one. Jeff, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
So I think your story has some things in common with Harrison Tinsley's story, which has been shared on this podcast, but it's yours didn't work out so well.
That's right.
Those who listened to Harrison's story understand that the only reason he was really able to effectively protect his son is that there was a lot of other evidence unrelated to the gender issue of the instability of the mother.
Right.
And that is why the court sided with him. You were not so fortunate. And I'm going into this interview blind, as I like to do sometimes, or
Okay.
when it just happens to work out that way. Sometimes I know my guest's story and sometimes I don't. So I like to think that when I don't know my guest's story, that I'm kind of with my listeners along for the ride, hearing everything for the first time. So I guess just start from the beginning.
Well, it started when my sons were 2.5 years old. I have two sons, James and Jude. I'm a Christian, and I named them after the brothers of Jesus. Starting about 2.5, I started noticing weird stuff from my ex-wife, who was a pediatrician in Capel, Texas. And she started doing weird things like she would put my son in timeouts, which first of all is weird because I raised my children until they were almost 10, and I had them either 50% of the time or 28 or 32, depending on what time in the story you get there. And I'm really lucky. My children, I never even had to put them in timeouts. They're reasonable young men. But she would put them into timeouts and she would say, "Don't be a boy. The monsters only eat boys," and then shut the door in the bedroom and stuff. So it's like, hey, you can't do that kind of stuff. Like, don't make him feel bad for being a boy. She immediately filed for divorce. And using her relationships with psychologists and care providers in the local community, was able to go to court and force me out of my own house. And I moved about a mile up the road. And when my son turned 3 years old, just after his third birthday, he told me that his mom was telling him that he was a girl and that he believed her. And if your audience goes out to YouTube, they can search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl" on YouTube, and you'll see that video. I'm an Orthodox Christian. So this video went viral all over Europe because in Orthodox countries in Eastern Europe, they sort of look upon Texas as like a Bible Belt state. So it just did not make sense to them that this could possibly be happening. In any case, she began to ramp up transitioning him and began to actually socially transition him, and he got a new name. The court records show that initially he chose the name Starfire from a cartoon character, but she talked him into getting the name Luna, which seems to be a very popular name for transgender children because of the book Luna, which is, I'm pretty sure, where it came from. So we got to this went on for 3 years till we got to our divorce trial. We had a counselor. His name is Blake Mitchell. He operates out of Frisco, Texas. Blake Mitchell asked me what the number one concern I had in the divorce. And I think he expected to hear something like property or money, and I really don't care about this stuff. I said, "She's tampering with my son's gender identity." And he looked into this. He told the court he did. I gave him the video that's on YouTube that I just mentioned. And he told the court that my ex-wife was not trying to transition my son to a girl. he told the court that I had made a false accusation against her, and on that basis gave me less than standard possession time with my son. So I was restricted from seeing my son because I truthfully reported that she was trying to transition him, and she lied to the court.
I have so many questions already. Okay, so you had twin boys. You have.
Twins. Mhm.
You
They're
have
not
twins.
identical, but yeah, they are twins.
You have fraternal twin boys.
Yes.
And any idea why your ex-wife targeted one of them?
Yeah, I have personal opinions. And then, of course, there's what she testified in court, which you'll quickly see as bogus. I'll lead off with what she said in court under oath. She said that she was in Target with James, and he saw a silver purse with a unicorn, and he asked her to buy it for him. A few days later, he asked for a girl's toy in a McDonald's Happy Meal, and that's when she began to explore the idea that he might be a girl. Now, the court, that was at my 2019 trial. The divorce was in 2016. So in the 2019 trial, the judge absolutely and the jury did not buy this explanation, this sworn testimony. What I think's really going on is she had two daughters. She told me when we got married and before we got married and we were during the engagement that she had adopted these children, which, from a Christian perspective, taking care of orphans is one of the number one things that we should be doing. So I'm all for it. But it turns out there was another side to the story that I didn't find out until about 18 months into the marriage, right before she became pregnant. The younger daughter was in fact adopted, but from her brother in California, who was a 3-time convicted felon and had exposed the child to methamphetamine in the womb and had conducted pretty serious child abuse on her. So I didn't know that I had a special needs child. So that's the first thing. She was adopted, though. That was not a lie. Her other child was from a sperm donor, however, and was not adopted. If I had known that, I would have definitely not married her. So I found that out about 18 months into the marriage. I figured out the special needs child thing because she really just took no interest in the schooling of the younger child. And so I went to school and I sat in classes with her and tried to encourage her. She seemed to be timid, And I discovered in working with her on her homework at home that she was in 4th grade and unable to do the addition algorithm. So I asked the school to test her, and sure enough, she couldn't do addition. So I pulled her out of public schools and I took off 3 months off work during the summer and just homeschooled her and got her ready to enter into a private school. And I got her into one of the better private schools in my area. And she's a D student. Then the next semester she was a C student. The next semester she was a B student, and she wound up being an A student. She's perfectly capable with a lot of extra work, but perfectly capable. But it's really strange to me that her mother didn't know this. How does a kid get to 4th grade and you don't know they can't do the addition algorithm? That just didn't compute for me. And there was a consistent pattern in the relationship where she picked a winner child and a loser child. So the winner child was the older daughter. And, we would have for me, were just excruciating, dinner time conversations where she would just literally spend an hour and talk about the superiority of the older daughter to the younger daughter. So that's one of the first times I just had to say, you can't do that. Like, I'm not going to put up with that. We're not going to run children down here. We're going to love the children equally. We're going to support them. If one kid needs more support than another, we're going to give it to them. We're not going to give equal support if one needs more in some areas. We're going to help the kids where they need to be. So my ex-wife kind of fell in line with that, but still really couldn't get over it. And I'll tell you how bad it was. And this is a warning sign too that happened about 18 months in. I realized that these girls had actually never been around men. So I started wondering after the divorce, was my ex-wife a lesbian and then she just got pregnant and I would be a sperm donor that pays child support? I think I was. So anyway, like the older child, she'd literally never been around men. She couldn't believe that boys can outrun girls, that boys typically win physical games. it blew her mind that I could run faster than her. Like, she was a very fast runner. I mean, her school a top track athlete. It just blew her mind, like she couldn't understand it. And I thought, that's just very strange to like not understand like the kind of sexual dimorphism that emerges quite early, in primary school. But anyway, so I went through this kind of stuff with the daughters and had to put a stop to it. Well, when the boys were born, she started the same pattern where Jude was the loser child and James was the winner child. So Jude was born with a little bit of cerebral palsy. There's some disturbing things I could tell you about seeing her punch herself in the belly when she was pregnant, but that's another story. Jude came out with some damage, and he almost died in the NICU. They often want genetically related parents to just touch the child because that often helps them, So we used egg donors because she was too old really to have fertile eggs. So she was not genetically related to him. And so they called me in to just put my hand on his back. And in 15 minutes, all of his signs went to normal. And so I just held him every day until he was okay. So she just decided that he was the one that was going to be like the younger daughter, So he's literally scrubbing baseboards with a toothbrush while the other kid is working on math and, schoolwork. It's literally like that, literally like something out of Cinderella. So that's the dynamic in the family. And I would say that also I noticed there was a parental inversion. It seemed to me the older daughter was the parent in the relationship with my ex-wife. And so eventually, as we reached a point where the girls get, into their teenage years, they're getting closer to high school. And, I'm saying, look, you can't, I know lots of other girls dress a certain way, but we're not going to dress immodestly. So, you can spend your money that I give you on your clothes however you want. It just has to be clothes that are not, you can't wear spray painted on jeans and things like that. You got to wear just like normal clothes. This really upset the older daughter. And that's when the ex-wife started to turn on me, was that kind of stuff. And then, she would ask me like, why are you spending all this time with the daughters? Don't you just be their friend? I'm like, well, you're working 90 hours a week in your private medical practice where you don't have anybody to share a call with. I have to do the homework for them. I have to cook for them. I have to get them to school in the morning and pick them up in the evening. I have to get them to their extracurriculars. You're not here. You've abandoned your daughters to me. So if they're going to be in my care, then I have to take some moral responsibility for what they do and how things go. So that's kind of the dynamic that was there before she filed for divorce.
There's so much there. There are the golden child versus scapegoat dynamics that you
Yes.
often see in the families of narcissists. There's
Yes.
also the double bind that you were in as a step parent. I'm not sure if you're aware that I'm a step parent, and I don't
Oh, I didn't know.
I don't share very much publicly about
Mhm.
that, but I have spoken about step parenting in general on this
Yeah.
podcast, including with other step parents. And step parents frequently find ourselves in double binds where, if you're too involved, then you're crossing a boundary. If you're not
Right.
involved enough, then you're not embracing the
Right.
responsibility, and you're supposed to have all the responsibility but get none of the credit. So
That's right.
here you are in this situation where those dynamics were intensified by the nature of your ex-wife's work,
Right.
and you were still being told to back off.
Yes.
There's so much there. How long were you married total to her?
5 years.
Okay, so a pretty busy 5 years. How old
Yes.
were the girls when you met them?
10.
Oh, they were both 10?
Yes. Yeah, they're just about 6 months behind.
Okay, so she went from having 2 girls almost the exact same age to then having
Yeah.
twins.
Almost the exact same age.
So kind
Yes.
of intensifying that sense of competition and splitting
Yes.
of the children. Wow, okay. So married 5 years, and sounds like pretty quickly noticing some of these red flags and finding yourself in double binds, where it made your job as a parent and a step parent quite difficult.
Yeah.
So all of this kind of set you up to recognize that when she had the twins, it seemed like there was maybe an underlying motive, however conscious or not,
Hmm.
to pit them against one another, put them in competition with one another. And
Yes.
so, if I'm understanding correctly, James was the golden child. And to be a golden child, he had to be a girl because being a boy seemed to have a lot of negative associations with it. Did this have some, what were her beliefs that were hostile towards
There's a
males?
lot there. So there's things I did not know. Again, I found out that her mother was the Lutheran minister that split the Lutheran denomination over lesbians being ordained in the church. So there's like a whole family history here that is completely against men. Um, and certainly, what I found is she simply does not believe fathers have any rights to their kids. She's just flat out told me that children belong to mothers, they don't belong to fathers. And that unfortunately is exactly how the courts enforced our divorce. I just have never had any rights to my kids since the day she filed. There is a persuasive argument, however, that she doesn't actually believe James is transgender, and I've had lawyers that have adopted that view. A couple of my appellate lawyers have said, well, I think she's just using this as a mechanism in the courts to gain sole control of the children. So I do, however, think that she has an ideological commitment to the idea that my son is is a girl. Does that mean I think that she actually believes that he's a girl? I don't. I think it's a kind of hubristic belief that she knows full well is not true. In fact, my son later, when we get past the divorce, you find that my son was ordered to counseling with a lady named Susan Fletcher. She's also out of Frisco, Texas.
That reminded me of one of the other questions I had for you. You said there was this counselor you expressed your concern to about the wife messing with the child's gender identity, and then the counselor testified against you. Now, when you say counselor, are you talking about just a family or child therapist here? Or are you talking about a guardian ad litem?
No, in Texas, almost all divorces, they actually assign a counselor. They're called custody evaluators. He's a licensed family and marriage therapist, plus he has a PhD in psychology. His name is Blake Mitchell out of Frisco, Texas. And he straight up lied to the court and said she wasn't trying to transition my son. Yeah, and he knew full well, he saw the video, like he knew full well that she had done that. And that's very common too. That's what I found in court is that, I don't want to offend you, but every single psychologist that has come into court has lied. And I fortunately have been in a position to prove it every time. So the court has had to throw out the testimony of these psychologists, but I have, without exception, every single psychologist, and there's been, I think, 4, has lied in court, just unabashedly lied straight up. So it's given me quite a negative view of psychology as a discipline because of that.
Well, this podcast is partly about the downfall of the counseling profession. Um, so So I'm imagining there were a lot of little things that happened during this phase of the twins' toddlerhood, where I mean, you gave one example of "Don't be a boy, monsters come for boys," and then the mommy says, "I'm a girl." So I mean, what we find with these, we call them the Munchie parents, the Munchhausens by proxy or the Transhausen parents, is there's often a redefining of a lot of little innocent childhood behaviors, and you gave the examples of a couple of toys that he was interested in. So I'm imagining that there was a lot of that going on. And what kind of reaction did you see in your son from all of this?
This is best explained like many things relating to the inner states of human beings in a kind of a story. So I could not understand cartoons, modern cartoons. Like, I can't follow the plots in them. I really don't even know what's going on. I feel like it's just random images, honestly. So I went and got old cartoons from when I was a kid, and I got the DVDs, and me and my boys would watch them. They really liked Johnny Quest, which I didn't know was like a groundbreaking animation series. It was the only show to ever show on all three networks back in the 1960s. And that's kind of show where like, things explode, they have guns, and people don't get back up, when they get shot or when they go down. Like it's real adventures with high stakes. So my boys really enjoyed these things. There's one called The Invisible Monster, which was their favorite. And they're young. I mean, these boys are just approaching 2. And they're watching, and I'm standing behind them, and just how fathers are. We just like to see our boys learning about the world and figuring things out. And there's this one part where the monster is chasing this little dog Bandit, and James is saying, "Oh, Bandit is fast enough to beat him. He's fast. He's smart. That monster is never going to catch him." And Jude is going, "Well, why is that monster so angry at that little dog? That little dog is scared. And look, Johnny's worried about his dog." And I was like, James is living the outer life of the characters, and Jude is living the inner life of the characters. And it was like, at that moment, I knew I had to completely raise these boys in totally different ways, and to explain the world to them and teach them how to navigate the world in totally different ways. So I'm more like Jude. My father was more like James. So I made a point of doing both kinds of things, interrelation things. We played sports that intentionally required human relationships. My boys settled on wrestling and boxing as the things that they really liked to do. They got introduced to masculine culture, at the boxing gym, and what it's like and how you get respect as a man and how that works and what respect is. And it's one of the reasons I think ultimately I never really had to discipline my boys. The counselors kept trying to get me with this authoritarian parenting stuff that they always use, they're like, "Is your dad, does your dad have lots of rules and all this stuff?" And my sons would just, the recordings of the sessions are hilarious, because my sons would just torpedo them when they would do that. My sons would say, "Well, my dad doesn't have any rules." And they would go, "Really?" So then they're like, "Oh no, this is a parent who's too permissive. Yay, now we can get him." And they would say, "Well, my dad just says be reasonable with people. And if we're reasonable with people, we don't have to make rules. So my dad just tries to show me how to be nice to people and think about what other people need and just watch out for people. And he says my room doesn't have to be perfectly clean. It should just never rise to anybody's level of attention. Like, we don't have to be perfect." And my dad has the no mistakes principle. If you make a mistake, but you fix it, it's not a mistake. So take all the risks you want. As long as you can fix it, take the risk, do it, go for it. They just never could get me on that. And they tried, the recordings are hilarious because they tried every which way to get my boys to say I was an authoritarian parent. So, this is the reason I could do that is my boys understood very early this concept of respect in the terms they can understand. For James, it was a physical concept. For Jude, it was a psychic concept. I'll give you an example with Jude. We're at the boxing gym. Jude has a little bit of cerebral palsy. He came out damaged a little bit. So boxing cured him of that, by the way, because all boxing punches cross the center line. He's forced to use both sides of his brain every time he punched. And after about 6 months, it just went away. And I knew it would. That's because I had the same problem, actually. So he couldn't jump rope. Jude just could not jump rope. It took him several months to even be able to jump over it one time. And then another month, for practice, and he got over twice. So, we do 10 minutes of jump rope and stuff like that before we start, sparring and stuff in the boxing gym. As soon as James got that second one, the entire we have pro boxers there. The entire boxing gym stopped. Everybody came over to him and said, "Okay, we were wondering about you. We were thinking you were going to quit, but you didn't quit. And now you've jumped twice. That's officially jumping rope. So now we know you're one of us because you're not a quitter." And he got it.
So much of what I'm hearing is fathering boys. I'm hearing raising male children by their male father in male-friendly ways. And it's going to sound foreign and maybe a little uncomfortable to women.
Yeah.
But it's reflective of how boys' brains are different.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the specific type of love and nurturance that they can only get from fathers. So it really felt like while you were able to be a presence in your son's lives, you were giving that male to male coaching.
Yeah.
And it sounded like they responded really well to it.
They did, to the point. And here's when I actually knew that my sons had imbibed those values and would never lose them for the rest of their life. That's why I think there's hope for James. They had never really seen like a real boxing match where two guys are trying to hurt each other for 3 minutes, 3 times, 3 minutes, and at the end of it are still friends. They just had never seen that. Okay. And I mean, really trying to knock each other out like a real boxing match. So I set up an exhibition match with a semi-pro boxer, and I had never met the guy before. He turned out to be 6'5", super fast, about 4 inches over my reach, and definitely had daddy issues, and my gray beard was like a target to him. So we had a knockdown, drag-out fight. In the first round, he liver shotted me. If you've ever been hit in the liver, it's like you curl up in the fetal position and you can't uncurl. It's a reflex action. So I'm down on my knees, and I can't get up. And Jude and James come over and to the ring, and they grab the bottom rope, and Jude says the following: "It hurts just as bad on the ground as it does standing up. You might as well stand up." And it made me laugh. It's touching to me now, but it made me laugh at the time. The referee laughed. Even my opponent laughed. And I got the longest 10 count probably in boxing history. And then I got the longest standing 8 count after that. And then I finished the 2 rounds, and this guy wiped the floor with me, beat the crap out of me. But my boys saw that I didn't quit, and that at the end, this big dude really respected me because I got some licks on him too. So he really respected me. But I knew then that my boys had my values, and there's no way she could take them away from him.
This is so male, what you just described. It is the opposite of how women relate.
Right.
Males are physical, they compete overtly,
Yeah.
and their bonds are resilient and actually improve with
Right.
that type of stress test.
Yes. 100%.
Female bonds are typically a lot more subtle and covert, more verbal and emotional. We are a lot more averse to having conflict with our friends, but when we do have conflict, it's often deadly to the friendship. We don't feel closer to each other after going through something like that, typically, unless we do a lot of female-friendly verbal repair of the emotions in the relationship. So what you describe is just about the most masculine relationship dynamic you could, and I'm so glad that you had boxing as a structure to introduce some of those concepts to the boys. And I can just imagine, I know I'm kind of jumping around now,
It's okay. It's all
but
right.
I can imagine that given how well they responded to this very masculine fathering, how anxiety provoking it must be to be being raised by a woman who, let's just say, hates masculinity,
Yes.
who is antagonistic, and because and schools already do this to a certain extent. Schools tend to be more girl friendly. They tend to want to teach kids to talk out their conflicts and repair their friendships, and they don't want boys just being boys on the playground. And so we already kind of skew towards the feminine when it comes to childhood relationship dynamics. And I can imagine if this message is constantly being sent that you can't hurt people, you got to watch out for people's feelings. And then if you hurt someone's feelings, you have to do all this verbal repair work. As valuable as those skills will later be for men in relating with women, because that's what we need as wives and girlfriends. Um, it's very anxiety provoking as a little boy, I think, to be raised with the expectation to meet a mother on that level when your boyish nature actually really needs that overt competition and rough and tumble play with other males who aren't threatened by your aggression and who will welcome it and who know kind of the male code of how to deal with aggression.
Oh yeah, 100%. There were some of these things were used against me in court. Here's one that was. It was at a playground in Capel, And James saw some boys like climbing up to this high spot, and then you have to lean out to this pole and you slide down this pole. But you got to lean out there and get it. And he was younger than they were, so he wasn't as big, so he had to really lean out there. And so he got up there and he said, "Oh, I don't want to do this. It's kind of too high." And I said, "Are you scared?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, you feel scared? Tell me again. You feel scared?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "That's normal. Like if you weren't scared, I wouldn't let you do this. You have to be scared to be safe." But I said, now what you have to learn is to say, I'm scared, and do it anyway. And I said, I'm right down here. If you fall, they will do it. And he couldn't quite get himself to do it. I said, okay, now just jump off. I'm going to catch you. So he jumped off and I caught him. Then he went back up and I said, are you scared? He goes, yeah. What does that mean? He said, that means I'm going to be safe. And I said, then what are you going to do? He goes, I'm going to do it anyway. And then he just did it. So a whole bunch of the moms went back and told my ex-wife about this. And it was brought up in court as like me pushing my boys in this severe way. And the counselors again asked my son about it. And he said, oh no, my dad just said I can take risks as long as I'm safe. I can take any risk I want as long as I'm safe.
So I was fatherless and I was raised by a pretty fearful, depressed mom. And I have a fear of heights that it's very intense. Like it's really visceral. I can't get over it. I feel it in my spine.
Yeah.
And so I just don't do certain things. I don't go in tall buildings. I don't go zip lining. And I remember the moment that my fear of heights got locked into me. It was when I was in Italy with my mom when I was 7, and we went to this chapel with a dome. I think it was like some basilica that had this tiny little ramp that you could walk on that was
Okay.
really high up. And I remember going with my mom up the stairs to walk up this ramp at a high place and looking back at her like, are we going to do this? Yeah, it's scary because it's really high, but it's also exciting. Are we going to do this? And I remember looking back and seeing the fear on her face, just like, no, 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 I can't do this. And that was when my natural inclination toward having a fear of heights got kind of locked into my nervous system, and I
I
kind of
see.
joined my mom in that state. And I think if I'd had a father to give me that kind of coaching,
Yeah.
I might have overcome that fear of heights. So I totally understand the need for that type of fathering, and it's just so frustrating how these systems skew toward prioritizing feminine values over masculine values rather than bringing them into harmony and cooperation.
I encountered it in schools a lot. I had to, because my boys wrestled and boxed, I had to give them like special instructions. I had to go to the school several times. I'm like, you can't actually tackle someone, I know you can tackle each other. We have this thing in my house I used to call rugby rules because I'm a rugby player. In rugby, you can't touch anybody above the collarbone. That's the safety margin. You can't hit the neck or the head. You can hit anywhere else, but you just can't hit the neck or the head. So we had rugby rules in my house. If you got punched or taken down and it was to the body, well, you should have learned how not to get punched. That's how it is. And so my boys just love to just do body boxing. They just do it all the time. They wrestle. So they go to school. They got buddies. They take their friend down and they hold him down for 3 seconds and then they let him up and then they go to want to do it again. Let's wrestle again, and they get in trouble, And so I had to tell them like, hey, it's you can't even do touch football here. Like you can't even like touch people here, right? So you're gonna have to play different kinds of games. You have to play skill games. So I had to teach my boys how to do skill kinds of games that don't involve physical contact. So taught them tetherball and Foursquare, games like that they could play. Which Jude's a great wrestler, but he's just not so good at those games. But that was good for him. And I had many conversations with teachers who would say, James is, it's hard for him to sit through the math lessons. And I go, well, yeah. So what do you do about that? And they're like, well, we just tell him to sit down. I'm like, well, why don't you just take him out to the playground? Do what I do. Take him out to the playground and have him do 100-meter sprints down and back. Do it 2 times. And when he comes back, he can sit down for 30 minutes. I guarantee it. That's all you got to do. Just have him run sprints. That's what I do at home. So my grandmother did with me. Same thing. And they're like, oh, we can't do that. He's got to sit in this room with no windows for 7 hours a day. And I'm like, well, if you put my son in a room with no windows for 7 hours a day, he's going to run around the room. So I don't know what to tell you.
So tell me about this chapter of James's life. I hear you're talking about elementary school. His mom starts calling him a girl from a very young age. So presumably was his mom using a different name and pronouns for him, but you had your time, but the teachers were still calling him James? Like, what was going on?
So what was going on is he would present as a girl with his mom and would present as a boy with everybody else at church, everywhere else. So, and I asked him point blank, and a counselor asked him about a year later the same question: why do you wear dresses at your mom's house but nowhere else? And he said the same thing both times. He said, my mother doesn't love me if I'm not a girl. Just as flat out. And he knew that from an early age, just straight up. So my ex-wife began to transition my son at school behind my back. She knew that she could not legally change his name without going back to court. And she didn't quite want to go back to court yet. She was building a case against me and all this stuff. So she began to work with the principal. Her name is Miss Mickelson, was the principal at Pinkerton Elementary in Capel, Texas, which they shut the school down once my case got public. They had to shut the school down because it got such an infamous reputation. But for almost 2 years, I was taking my son to school in boys' clothes, and his teacher and principal would give him a dress and have him change into a dress and have him use the girls' restroom. And they did not inform me of this. They did it behind my back. And it turns out it's legal. It's legal in Texas and all 50 states for them to do this, because what they said was the school counselor was using a part of Texas law which allows her to exert a right of privacy against one of the parents. And it was originally, done so if a child reported abuse, you didn't have to tell the parent they reported the abuse, But they have a right to exert a right of privacy for the child against the parent. And that's what they did. And I didn't catch on to it till almost 2 years. And the way I caught it is I came to lunch with my son unannounced. And there he was in his dress. And so that ramping up that she started doing behind the scenes led to another trial in 2019. Where she filed to get sole control of the children again. I've never actually sued her. I don't think courts are the right place to adjudicate these problems with children or parenting. So in the 2019 trial, the top transgender experts in the world showed up at this little courtroom in Dallas County, the 255th District Court, with Judge Kim Cooks. Now, Kim Cooks is the same judge that gave me less than standard possession because the counselor lied. So now we get a new guy, a guy named Benjamin Albritton. Now, Blake Mitchell charged me $40,000 to do a custody evaluation. Benjamin Albritton charged me $80,000 to do a custody evaluation. In this custody evaluation, he said that I was doing too intellectually advanced activities with the kids. Both of my sons could play chess early on, and he just didn't believe they could play chess. And so he watched us play chess and then reported that I was doing age inappropriate behaviors because I was playing chess with my boys. He also recognized to me, I recorded all of our sessions, and he recognized to me that Miss Georgelas had lied to the previous custody evaluator and had lied to the court. She was actually trying to transition James to a girl. But he never put that in his report, that she lied to the previously to the court. And he published a report in which he said that my son should be transitioned to a girl. It's the first time in Texas history that had ever happened. So I have a jury trial. I'm with the same judge. Remember, this is important. It's the same judge. There was a specific moment when my ex-wife was testifying when the judge realized that she had been completely deceived by my ex-wife. And it's when my ex-wife started talking about how James as a girl still has a penis, and that, girls can pee out in the backyard, with their penis just like a boy can. And the judge just looked at me and went, oh, I mean, you could just see it. She was like, oh my God, you told me the truth in the first trial. Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who runs, used to run LA Children's, gender clinic. She was their expert witness. I put her in a deposition and I asked her one question and destroyed her. They didn't put her on in front of the jury. They would never put her on in front of a Texas jury after she answered this one question. I said, Dr. Olsen Kennedy, what is your medical justification for removing healthy body parts from children? And she replied, if they cause psychological distress, they're not healthy body parts. Opposing counsel is a woman. She threw her pen on the floor and left the room and took herself off the case. And so they didn't put her on. They didn't actually bring an expert on other than an endocrinologist. I, on the other hand, had Dr. Levine, who created the first gender clinic in America in the 1970s, early 1970s. They closed the clinic after 4 years because all their data showed that their treatments were actually harming patients. So he destroyed them. He completely destroyed the counselor who said my son should be transitioned by showing that he did not understand the logical relationship among the elements of the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. He just didn't understand anything about it. He just made this up. And it was at that point that I realized that there were things going on behind the scenes than this trial. This Benjamin Albritton was being told to render a report like this. It was clear that you could not be a psychologist in the state of Texas, that the American Psychological Association, the Texas Psychological Association was not going to allow you to be a psychologist in the state of Texas if he didn't recommend that my son be transitioned to a girl. And that's what he did. So anyway, out of this trial, I won. I won everything. I got 50-50 custody because the judge realized she'd been lied to. I got 50-50 custody, no child support. I got a check on all medical procedures. So she couldn't hurt this boy. So the judges in Dallas County took a vote and moved my case into another courtroom, the 301st District Court, with a judge I call Bloody Mary Brown. Bloody Mary Brown had a gender-expansive daughter and is a hardcore leftist. And she systematically stripped me of all parental rights using temporary orders because they're not appealable. And so the jury verdict was never implemented. I got a jury verdict, but the judges just created all kinds of reasons that they could never do that. She denied me all discovery from my ex-wife. From that date, from 2019, I've never received discovery in any of the cases that I've been in. So I've never seen her legal records. I don't know what counselors she's taken the boys to. She doesn't have to provide me any information at all. Eventually, they put me on supervised visitation because I wouldn't follow a gag order. It's going to be hard for you to believe what I'm about to tell you. I've had lawyers challenge me and they have to actually see the paperwork, but this is absolutely true. The gag order that Mary Brown put me under gave me a lifetime ban from all podcast interviews, newspaper interviews, television interviews, radio interviews. It a lifetime ban from producing any videos, writing any blog posts, writing op-eds, or writing any newspaper articles, or creating any videos. And it gave me a lifetime ban from talking about 3 political subjects: gender dysphoria, gender expansiveness, and whether my son was a boy or a girl. So I just told the judge, look, I don't know if you know, but Texas has the highest level of protection for free speech, even way greater than the federal government. So in Texas, there is no prior restraint on speech here. Period. There just isn't any. There's one exception for a jury pool, but it's only for the limited during the time of the trial. So there are no prior restraints. However, in Texas, you are definitely responsible for your speech. If you misuse your speech, you can go to jail here for it. You can get sued. You can go to jail. You're responsible for your speech, but nobody can stop you from saying it. Not even a sheriff, not a judge, nobody. So I told the judge 3 times in court, I said, Judge, look, I have total contempt for the text of the order. I have contempt for the office of the judge that did this because I have rights as a Texan and you violated the Texas Constitution. I have contempt for you as a person for trying to silence a father like this. So, Judge, I mean, I'm in the maximum contempt of court. Like, you can't get more in contempt of the court than I am. So I'm demanding that you jail me for the maximum time for criminal contempt in the Lewis Derrick County Jail, which is right across the street, because I want to go up to criminal court on a writ of habeas corpus, and let's have a criminal court decide if this gag order is enforceable.
Damn.
And she wouldn't do it. And the reason is she knew that it would be struck down, immediately struck down in a criminal court. I begged her to put me in jail. She wouldn't do it.
Wow.
And she would just go, Mr. Younger, you know, jail is not a nice place. You know, you've got to work. You've got things you've got. I said, ma'am, it's infinite leisure. I'm just going to finish my book. I'll study philosophy. I'll do math research. I'm not so afraid of jail, but I'm very afraid of your gag order. And I'm not ever going to follow your gag order. I'm never following it. And so what she did instead is she said, well, and this is literally the reasoning in her opinions. She said, Jeff Younger is not following the illegal gag order. The illegal gag order was entered in the best interest of the children. That means Jeff Younger is not acting in the interests of his children. And on the basis that he's not acting in the interests of his children, I'm going to give him supervised visitation, and I'm not going to allow him to see his children. That's how he got supervised visitation.
Damn.
The supervisor is an ugly man in a dress. He's a transgender guy. And then she chose forensic counseling services in Dallas County. You notice that I named names. Forensic counseling services. They refused to let me change my son out of a dress during the visits. They would not let me pray with my son. They would not let me call my son by his real name. So I could not do those visits. Just as a moral issue, I decided when this all began, I said, I'm never going to morally miseducate my son. I'm never harming my son. And I'm never going to have my resources used to harm my son. Those are the three limits that I have, hard limits. I'm flexible. I'm willing to cooperate, but those are three things I'm never going to do. So I'm not going to harm my son by teaching him he's a girl. So 6 months go by where I'm writing letters to my sons and so forth because I can't see them. They say, well, you're not visiting your sons. You have the opportunity to visit your sons, but you're not visiting your sons. And since you've abandoned your sons, we're going to let your ex-wife move the children to California. So you see how they work? They create the conditions where you can't comply and then use your noncompliance as a basis to take more of your rights. That's the way family courts work.
That is sick.
It's sick. It's insidious, is it not?
All right, just to recap, they issue this illegal gag order preventing you from having a voice on these topics, or even just going on podcasts, having a blog, any of these things. And then you say, this is illegal. So you call the judge's bluff and say, I am as contemptuous as can be.
Yeah.
Go on and arrest me so that we can go to trial as to whether you had the right to place this restraint on me in the first place.
Right.
The judge says, well, I'm not going to do that. But what I'm going to do is construe your noncompliance as noncompliance with doing what is in the best interest of your children.
Right.
Which I'm then going to use to strip away your rights and restrict you to supervised visitation, which must take place with this trans-identified male in the room and with your son in a dress. And when you said,
Right.
well, I'm not going to cooperate with that because that I'm standing on principle, I'm not harming my child, and that would be further harming my child, then they said, well, since you are not taking the opportunity we've given you to spend time with your child, you have abandoned your child, and now you're losing all your rights.
So then I went up to the Texas Supreme Court on an emergency mandamus and argued that California just passed its transgender kidnapping bill. If my son goes to California, they will never repatriate him to Texas, no matter what a Texas court orders. And he would remove the protections of the Texas law that I worked so hard to pass to protect him. The Supreme Court, Justice Blacklock wrote the opinion, Blacklock and Young, but Blacklock is the main and the main culprit here. He's the supervillain. Justice Blacklock, I call him Blackhearted Blacklock, wrote in his opinion that my son would be no more likely to be transitioned in California than in Texas, where it was illegal. He literally wrote that in his opinion. I think it's instructive that 9 months later, after he rendered this opinion, that the governor of Texas promoted him to the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court. So that shows you that there's some nefarious things going on in the Republican Party, and I can definitely talk about that and what I learned about that and how, well, really the transgender movement was started by Republicans, not by Democrats, which really surprised me. And it explains a lot of things in your own mind about how this happened under the radar because people weren't looking in the right place.
Many of you listening to this show are concerned about an adolescent or young adult you care about who's caught up in the gender insanity and therefore at risk of medical self-destruction. I developed ROGD Repair as a resource for parents just like you. It's a self-paced online course and community that will teach you the psychology concept and communication tools the families I've consulted with have found most helpful in understanding and getting through to their children, even when they're adults. Visit rogdrepair.com to learn more about the program and use promo code SOMETherapist2025 at checkout to take 50% off your first month. That's rogdrepair.com. What do you mean when you say Republicans started the transgender movement?
This is really shocking to me, learning this. So the largest donor to the Republican Party is a man named Paul Singer. He's a hedge fund billionaire. Paul Singer founded the Human Rights Campaign, the yellow equal sign, which is the largest and most powerful transgender lobby group in the world. And it's the number one lobby group for trans and kids, and has a whole legal defense fund, a whole legal structure around it. He's the largest donor to the Republican Party. He also funds the Manhattan Institute. And if you go out to the Manhattan Institute, there's a whole series of videos of them interviewing him, talking about why he got involved in transgender issues and so forth. Well, it turns out Paul Singer is the largest out-of-state donor to Texas political candidates, which is why my ex-wife, as a crazy trans advocate in conservative Texas, was able to muster more political power than I could and move my son out of state. It was because of the influence of guys like Paul Singer. James Pritzker, who really started funding the first children's gender clinics, at the time that he started doing that, was the third largest donor to the Republican Party. He's now an ugly man in a dress, and he's a Democrat, but at the time he was a Republican. And the Adelson family are the ones who funded all of the drag shows for kids and transgender story times in libraries for kids. And they're the second largest Republican donor. So you find that the top three donors to the Republican Party that completely fund the Republican National Committee are all deeply committed to the trans agenda. And that's why you had Republican governors in Arkansas and Mississippi vetoing legislation that would protect children by outlawing these things. I always was like, why would a Republican governor ever veto something like this? I mean, to me, this is the most obvious question since slavery. And the Republican Party was founded to end slavery. Like, this is a classic issue for Republicans. Like, I don't get it. Well, it's because the donor class. So it turns out in the Republican Party, the donor class of the party are Northeastern liberals. And so the donor class for both parties are the same people. And they're from the same culture, and they have the same social values. Those values are in complete contradiction to the social values of Texas voters. I can just tell you that right now. I mean, Texas is not a conservative. It's like legitimately right-wing, right? I mean, dueling is still legal here, for example, right? So, Texas is like an outlier, even when you talk about conservative states. So if you think about it, how do Republican politicians solve this problem? You need the money from the donor class to get elected, because paid voter outreach is how you get elected. That's just the reality of it. But then you have an extremely right-wing voting demographic. how do you solve this problem? And here's basically how they do it. In Texas, I've verified that they do it this way. In Florida, Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, and South Carolina, where I've done lots of work. And I've gotten laws passed in all those states. The way they do it is they pass a law that seems conservative, but they put loopholes in for the donor class so the law never has an effect. That's why the Republican Congress can pass all these bills to close down the border, but it never does. There's always loopholes. They always put loopholes in there for the donor class. There's several examples beyond the transgender issue, but like in my case, they removed 3 sentences from the bill that I wrote. And that would have classified doing these procedures as felony child sexual abuse, which in Texas is a death offense. You can get capital punishment for this in Texas. Okay, you can definitely get life in prison for it. So that means that you can't like take your kid to Thailand in order to sexually abuse them. When you come back to Texas, we're going to give you lethal injection when you come back, right? So this would have prevented parents in Texas from taking their kids to Colorado or California to get them sexually mutilated in these surgeries. They knew that. So what they did is they just outlawed the procedures, but didn't have any criminal penalty attached to it. So it's just sitting there. You can't do it, but there's no way for us to enforce you not doing it. And so parents are free to still take their kids to other states and get it done. And that's exactly what's happening in Texas. They did the same thing with abortion. Everybody thinks we banned abortion in Texas. We did not ban it. We haven't stopped a single abortion in Texas. Most abortions now are chemical abortions. They left loopholes in there that allow the mothers to take the drugs as long as it's not administered by a doctor. So you go to Planned Parenthood gives the drugs. They have a video camera that proves that the mother took the drugs, not the doctor. The doctor didn't administer them. And so we still have abortions here in Texas. They just leave these loopholes. That's how they play the game. So they convince the Republican voting base that they did something conservative, but they leave loopholes and they still get their money from the liberal donor class. So what you have in the conservative movement generally, in the Republican Party particularly, is a civil war between the donor class and the voting class. And that's what's playing out with Trump right now. And that's how we got the executive order with Trump. That was a complete overturning of the social beliefs of the donor class. That executive order that creates the conditions where it's almost impossible for hospitals to do these procedures to kids was done in complete contravention of the donors that got Trump elected. It's something that he made the donors compromise on that. And there are no loopholes in that executive order. So that means that at some level, the grassroots Republicans have at least won a skirmish in the civil war going on in the party.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So back to your case.
Yeah.
So you had just gotten us to the point where you explained how they legally managed to take away all of your parental rights. And this allowed your ex-wife to take your sons to California. And then what happened?
Well, I think it's important to know something. Just back up a little bit before we get out of Texas. We had an election for Mary Brown, Judge Bloody Mary Brown. And she made an error on her ballot application and was thrown off the ballot. So I saw that as an opportunity. I found a retired lawyer who had been abused by this judge and family. He had clients that were just suffering under her. So he ran as a write-in candidate. Mary Brown ran as a write-in candidate, and the Democrats put up a write-in candidate. So we had 2 Republicans and a Democrat run. So in the primary, my guy's the only Republican running, so he automatically gets it. We get to the general. Mary Brown's the only Democrat left standing. So we have a write-in contest between a Republican and a Democrat. A lot of Republicans wrote in the name. It was a hard to spell name of this lawyer. A lot of them just wrote his first name or his last name. Anyway, all of these write-in ballots went up to the Texas Secretary of State because the Democrats challenged them. Listen to this. The Republican Secretary of State invalidated over 1/3 of the Republican votes in the race in order to get Mary Brown elected again. Let me say that again. The Republican Secretary of State invalidated 1/3 of the Republican votes in that race in order to get Mary Brown elected again. So it's very clear the donor class in the Republican Party wanted that Democrat back in office. At this point, I think I had been determined to be a test case. And I know that the National Center for Lesbian Rights was showing up to the trials, and you would see them, court watching all the time. So a week after this Secretary of State did this, he resigned from office. So there was no way for the legislature to hold him accountable for doing this. To this day, the state of Texas has never officially pronounced Mary Brown as the winner of the election, even though she's serving as the judge. So there's been a whole bunch of Republican malfeasance here in order to make sure that I lose my case in Texas. They were very happy that my ex-wife moved my sons to California because they knew I'd probably follow. And I had been quite a thorn in the side of the Republican establishment in Texas to get that law passed. They did not want to pass that law. I made them pass that law. And I literally coerced them, like to the point where, I shut down the phone systems at the Capitol 3 times. They had to buy a new phone trunk, spent $250,000 to get a new phone trunk. Like I probably generated more grassroots political action than anybody in Texas history for that bill. And they really didn't want to pass it. Still took me 6 years to get it done. 3 legislative sessions, they wouldn't pass it. So finally, they get me out of Texas, and my ex-wife moves to California. I moved to California in its school district, recognizing California's crazy domestic violence laws. And I didn't tell you that she accused me of domestic violence, and we had a criminal trial that cost me $80,000. I was found not guilty in 15 minutes by the jury. But, in Texas, that's a win button. If you're ever found guilty of domestic violence, you can never have custody of a child again. So anyway, so I had a criminal trial. So I know California is crazy with its domestic violence laws. So I moved in the school district, but still 30 minutes away from my ex-wife. So I couldn't be accused of stalking or anything, because I wanted to have a chance of at least getting some visitation time with my son. I know if I lived in his school district, I had a better chance. So I'm maintaining 2 residences, one in Texas, one in California. It's super expensive. I get into, California has this weird structure in family court. You get 3 judges in family court. You get a supervising judge, something called a home court judge, and you get a trial judge. So we went to the home court judge, Judge Crusade, in the LA Superior Court. Judge Crusade's taken my side in the hearing. We're basically saying, hey, we want an open court. The other side is saying we have to close the court. You can't have any press, no court watchers. Everything has to be sealed. California doesn't allow that in their law. There's no reason in California you can have closed courts at all. So Judge Crusade was all on my side. And then she gets a text on her phone. She halts the hearing, says we'll be back in 30 minutes. She recesses, come back in 30 minutes. She doesn't say anything else. She says the case is sealed. Goodbye. Sealed the case. That was it. Once the case was sealed, I was never able to electronically access any of my own legal filings or the legal filings of my ex. The case was actually deleted. It wasn't just sealed. They deleted it from the entire system. So I've never had access to my own court documents. So I had to go into trial not even being able to access documents. It was terrible. Then they consolidate all the judges into one, and I get Judge Mark Uhas. He's my home court, supervising, and trial court judge all in one. They don't do that in Superior Court and Family Court. This trial was treated very specially by California. The first thing I asked for was an independent medical exam of my son. I asked for an independent psychiatric exam of my son, and I asked that both my ex-wife and me be subjected to forensic psychiatric examinations, not psychological, but psychiatric. The judge denied all 3. In particular, he said you cannot independently have a medical exam or a psych exam of your own son. You're just going to have to take whatever exam she has, whatever she decides, whoever she decides to take them to. Then I didn't get discovery because I wanted to know what her funding sources were. The law firm she used in Texas has a minimum retainer of $175,000. The Morris Forster law firm, I'm sure you know them in California. They're the people that like win for Google and Facebook and all these people. Their minimum retainer is $250,000, and they represented her in my federal case to get rid of the gag order. So, like, where's all this money coming from? Well, it turns out it's coming from all these donors I was telling you about earlier. They're paying for her legal fees, and so the judge said, no, she doesn't have to tell you who's paying. You're entitled to all that when you go to trial. You get financial information on the other person, how much money they make, where all their income comes from, what their legal fees are, who paid the legal fees. You get all this information. So I went to trial with no discovery from the other side. But still, when I went into trial, I had a great expert. I had Miriam Grossman, who just destroyed the other experts. Like, it was actually embarrassing. She did a phenomenal job. My cross-examination of A.J. Eckert, who was the expert that they brought, it's a, what looked to me like would have been a perfectly decent woman, but she makes a really ugly man. She thinks she's a man. And I just trapped her in all the logical contradictions with the transgender ideology and just destroyed her. Eventually, the judge actually just stepped in and said, "Mr. Younger, your approach is emotionally abusive to the witness." And so I just stopped. I had made my point. So the judge realized that he could not rely on any of the transgender scientific evidence that was brought by the other side. So he said, I'm not going to consider any medical evidence brought by either side. We're not going to look at any of the transgender science. We're not going to look at any of this. The only thing I'm going to decide, he said, was who is acting in the best interest of the child. You see this same thing coming back? And they said, well, Mr. Younger's violated the gag order. He's told this court that he will never follow the gag order. Mr. Younger has indicated an unwillingness to visit his children because we gave him supervised visitation in LA County. Yeah, that's great. I have to fly to LA County. Then I have to get a hotel, and then I have to visit my sons. So it's like $3,000 a visit. So again, they create the conditions where you can't comply, and then on that basis that you don't comply, they take your children. So he ruled that she was acting in the best interest of the children, gave her the explicit authority to chemically castrate James, gave me supervised visitation. Even phone calls now have to be supervised. So every phone call costs $500, and which means you can't do it. And even then, I have to affirm that he's a girl. And that's what happened in late December or mid-December when the trial ended. And I'm pretty sure she doesn't have to notify me of anything, but I'm pretty sure right after that, she chemically castrated him with puberty blockers. They had every intention of going forward with cross-sex hormones. I just don't know when. And I'll give you an example of a conversation that's recorded verbatim in the medical records. They asked my son, remember he's 12, do you want to have children later in life? And he answered yes. It's very unusual for a child that age to say that. And they said, well, we can, when we remove your testicles, we can harvest the sperm from your testicles and you can have a baby as a woman later in life. This is what they're teaching my son. So once I saw that in the medical records, I stopped paying child support. The position of the court is that I have to pay for the chemical castration and sexual mutilation of my child as medical child support. So remember the three principles. I said I would never harm my son. I said I would never morally miseducate my son. And I said I would never allow my resources to be used to harm my son. Those are the three principles that I started out with here. So I will never pay child support again. I'm not going to do it on moral grounds. And, my guess is that eventually will put me in the California prison system eventually. But I'm not going to hurt my son. That's where we are right now. I'm going up on appeal right now, but the appellate court is doing all kinds of shady things. They're there was 2 letters transposed in a word on one of the forms, and they denied my filings based on that. They said I have to I have to fly to California and personally deliver the filings. I can't file electronically, even though California law says that the courts have to allow electronic filing. They're just doing everything they can to prevent me from going up on appeal because, frankly, the trial court judge, Mark Uhas, just violated the law left and right. So that means the appellate court's going to have to violate the law left and right. And then when I go to the California Supreme Court, they're going to have to violate the law left and right. And that allows me to go into federal court where I could actually win. And they know that.
Wow, that's dizzying. So you're looking at a future where on one trajectory you win in federal court, and on another trajectory you end up in prison.
Or both. Could be both. Yep. So, but I'm not going to pay child support. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to evade it in every which way possible. I'm going to commit every criminal, contemptible offense in order to avoid my resources being used to hurt my son. I'm just not going to hurt my son. I'm not going to do it. Nobody's going to coerce me into doing that.
When was the last time you saw him?
It's been 2.5 years now.
Any idea how he's doing?
I don't know for sure. I think he's been thoroughly brainwashed. He's also been medicated. They put him on that Vivance stuff.
Vyvanse?
He's on Vivance. He's also on ADHD drugs. She put him on ADHD drugs when he was in 3rd grade because he didn't want to wear a dress. So she put him on ADHD drugs so he'd be compliant. So he's on which is basically cocaine for all practical purposes. So he's on cocaine and Vivance, and it's basically a kind of brainwashing, chemical brainwashing is being done to him.
Wow. Okay. And here you were trying to give them a boy-friendly upbringing that allowed them to get their energy out, and I wonder what it's like for his brother.
Well, again, let me try to illustrate this through a narrative. I think you can really get a sense for my boys, and you get a sense for what's really happening just from hearing facts that happen. So, I took them to see their grandmother, my mom, and my mom told them what they thought were all these tall stories. Well, they thought I was telling them tall stories all the time about my boyhood, because I grew up in rural Texas, up in the Panhandle, which is a flat plains area. Apache used to roam there. And in fact, the Apache Comanche were finally defeated by the Texas Rangers just 50 miles from where I lived. So the range wars were finally ended right there. And I grew up pretty poor. I was responsible as a boy for bringing home food twice a week by hunting, to help feed the family. So before I was old enough to get a rifle, I got my first rifle when I was 13. Before I was old enough to get a rifle, I used to, my uncle showed me how to make an Apache throwing stick, which is kind of it's like a boomerang, but it's not symmetrical. It's got the crook is, off to one side. You know what I mean? And I used to hunt rabbits and bring home rabbits all the time, bring home 3 or 4 rabbits for the pot, and we'd eat those. And so they hear all these stories, during the summers, I just go camping for a couple of weeks and come home. I'd go out for a couple of weeks, just come home. I just walked to Paladura Canyon, camp out in the canyon, hunt rabbits, found wild corn and stuff. And that's how I lived, I grew up like that. And so they hear all these stories from my mom, and they're like, these are not just tall tales, Dad. Like, these are not exaggerations, and my mom had all these pictures of me with my throwing stick and rabbits and stuff. And so they said, well, we want to hunt rabbits. So I actually got them hunting boomerangs from Hawaii. And we used to go, there's no season for rabbits where I live in Texas. So we just go out to the creek and just go hunting rabbits. I taught them how to track and everything. So we've been out there. We were completely filthy dirty. We're piling into the house, and so we all, just like men do, we're going to take a shower before we go to the dinner table because we don't want the women folk to, have to endure that. So we all pile into the shower. We're all cleaning up, and he just points down at James's penis and he says, he's a boy. How come they keep telling me I have to say he's a girl? And at that time, the court had me under an injunction where I could not tell my son whether it was a boy or a girl. I was actually under a court order for about a year where I couldn't tell him. So I said, well, before you go to bed, I read you in Genesis up to the creation of man and woman. I do that every night. I said, what do you think? And he said, well, he's definitely a boy. And so I realized in his mind, it's like I taught him not to lie. And he's going, well, okay, when am I supposed to lie? And I think it's been morally damaging to him. And I think he's had to give into it and kind of essentially play along with a false persona with his mother, because he told me many times he was afraid of her. So I think he's just playing along, and I think it's been morally damaging to him.
How old were your sons during this memory that you just shared?
They were 6 years old.
The memories you do share seemed like they were really soaking up your fathering.
Yeah, I mean, I sorely miss my boys. I really wanted family. It just didn't work out for me. But I wanted my sons to go on and have big families, 6, 7 kids, just to have that joy of that, because, I think in the modern world, it's something that's missing from the lives of a lot of men, and I wanted my boys to have it. I hope they can find a way to that. Hopefully, when they're adults and we can spend some time together, we can help them, get that done. But I'm having a moral quandary myself. Like I'm at a point where I believe in holy matrimony. But it's pretty clear to me that civil marriage is something that no man can enter. The laws that regulate marriage are simply too dangerous for men to enter. I mean, look at me. Like my entire retirement's been spent. I can't see my kids. My kids are being raised in values that disgust me. And I'm looking at the prospect of going to prison just because I don't want to hurt my kids. Like when we reach a point where the laws are doing that to fathers, it's hard for me to recommend to my sons that they get married. And I've had a lot of my followers on X. I have 75,000 followers on X, and I had a bunch of them in Austin contact me. And I went down there and had lunch with these guys. And they've all seen their fathers' lives just completely destroyed in family court. And they have come together in kind of a consortium, and they're going down to Argentina and they're getting surrogates. They're not getting married because they want to have children in such a way that they can't be legally taken from them. And then I have a friend of mine who contacted me from the UK, and there's 3 businesses that have been formed in the UK to help men get surrogates so that they can have children in a way that it can't be taken from them. So I keep telling, Republican legislators and lawmakers and anybody that will listen, conservatives anywhere, even if you're not conservative, if you just love families, you have got to reform the laws in this country to give fathers the ability to be secure in their posterity. And if you don't, I think you're just going to lose the family altogether. I think men are just not going to participate anymore.
I hear you, Jeff. My personal opinion, surrogacy is not the way. It is not right
No,
to bring
of course
children
not.
into this world with the
No.
intention to deprive them of their natural parents. But we have a massive problem on our hands. I hear you. And if this were a different conversation, maybe we would be talking about what advice you would have given to your younger self in terms of the qualities you were looking for in a woman, the red flags that you missed, because I don't think that the moral of the story is all women are evil and out to take men's rights away from them, take their children and take their money. That's not the moral of the story, right?
I
We
agree.
want to restore the sanctity of family, and that relies on trust. And so we need to find a way to help people have relationships where they are safe to trust. But I really hear you, and I'm so sorry for what's happened
Yeah,
to you.
I have to admit, I do take issue with the idea that it's purely an issue of personal trust. I think the laws incentivize this kind of stuff. And
Yes.
conservatives used to understand this about incentives, how welfare, for example, the welfare system destroyed the black family by removing fathers from the house. You couldn't get welfare benefits if there was a father in the house, right? And conservatives used to talk about these things. But when we talk about marriage in general and the crisis of fatherlessness, you have over half of children now being raised in fatherless homes. We crossed that threshold 4 years ago. That to me is a result of incentives in the laws that can be fixed. They can be fixed. Fathers have, because you can't, it's the most important decision you'll ever make is to have kids. And it's the most fulfilling thing that will ever happen to you is when you hold your children when they're born. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Not your business. Nothing that you do will ever compare to having those children. And to ask people to have that rest on the emotional state of another person is not sufficient. And our laws used to not do that. We had a change of laws in the 1980s. And there was a federal program called Title 4D, which created incentives in the states. The states actually make money from the federal government for every divorce. And they make a lot of money. In Texas, it's $500 million a year. Yes. So for every dollar of child support that's issued, the states get 66 cents from the federal government. That's why you never get equal custody. Because if there's equal custody, there's no child support. And the state loses money. I provide to the state of Texas, when I was paying child support, about $36,000 a year in revenue to the state. So just me paying my ex-wife child support created that revenue for the state in federal reimbursements. We need to take away those incentives, from the states. Yeah.
We need to wrap up soon, but I want to give you one more opportunity to share whatever message you want people to take from this.
Well, your children aren't safe from the transgender menace. The schools transition my son secretly. It's very clear the courts will side with the parent that wants to transition the child, not the other way around. So the most important thing is that in your state, in your schools, and in your county, you make sure that this stuff is illegal. You make sure that it is not legal for the government to assist it, and make sure it's not legal for parents to do it to their children. And there's another thing I learned, this right of privacy thing. You have to be very careful about leaving your children alone with licensed care providers. I know that my ex-wife, I've had people contact me who used to take their children to her as a pediatrician. And they would, they have this period in every well check now where the pediatrician asks you to leave the room so they can talk to your children in private. And my ex-wife was pushing transgender and gender transition on children during those well checks. So you cannot leave your children alone with licensed care providers. You need to be extremely vigilant about it because it's being pushed still. You think you've won maybe with Trump, but you haven't. It's still all over the education institutions. And so be super vigilant about that, and don't let people secretly transition your kid. And one of the things that I've talked to a lot of parents that have contacted me is a lot of their girls especially have been exposed to this stuff online. There's simply just no excuse, in my opinion, for a parent to allow a child unfettered internet access until they're an adult. So I know with my children, you could access like online games or whatever, but it had to be in a public area. You couldn't do it in your room or anything like that. And so you got to be really careful, I think, with children online. And I don't think parents really are. I know a lot of parents that think they are, and they're not. So that's something that I would leave as well. Learn from me. If you get into the court system on this, you'll probably lose. So the best thing is prevention, and don't get into the court system.
Jeff, thank you for your time and your story.
All right.
Thank you for listening to You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly take a moment to rate, review, share, or comment on it using your platform of choice. And of course, please remember, podcasts are not therapy, and I'm not your therapist. Special thanks to Joey Pecoraro for this awesome theme song, Half Awake, and to Pods by Nick for production. For help navigating the impact of the gender craze on your family, be sure to check out my program for parents, ROGD Repair. Any resource you heard mentioned on this show, plus how to get in touch with me, can all be found in the notes and links below. Rain or shine, I hope you will step outside to breathe the air today. In the words of Max Ehrmann, with all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world.